Thank you, Bob, for that very kind introduction. Thanks to all of you for being here. It's a great honor to get this honor. I'm astounded by how large the crowd is. It stretches back as far as the eye can see. I didn't know you could fit 400,000 people in a room like this. I'm going to regale my family with the stories of the 3 standing ovations I got from all of you, excitedly. So I appreciate the kindness of the introduction, but I will say that Bob left one thing out because he's a classy guy, and in the time that I've left office, many people have introduced me for, among other things, undeserved awards like this, and they leave one fact out. And I didn't leave my job voluntarily. Bob intoned when Preet left his job, I was fired by the President of the United States. Ordinarily, if you applaud the firing of a person, that would hurt my feelings. But among other things, as my Twitter bio says, I have been banned from Russia by Putin and fired by Trump. That's kind of cool, actually. The first interview I did after I left office was with, oddly, Hassan Minhaj of The Daily Show, who asked me a lot of questions about what it was like to be an unemployed loser. He asked me a series of questions that included things like, what is it like to eat expired yogurt out of a dumpster? It's actually not bad if you have granola. I'm doing a lot of things, as Bob mentioned, and I'm very excited about all of those things. I want to congratulate all the other honorees. It's a great privilege to be on this stage in any capacity, and to share this honor with those other folks is very humbling. I want to mention also Calvin Butts in particular, who described how he had issues with a number of mayors. He's not the only one who had that. I want to also thank, in particular, people who are not here. There are a couple of people here from my old office, and the only reason that anyone is thinking of honoring me with this award is because I had, on any given day, 450 of the best employees and the best public servants you could ever imagine in an office. And I learned a long time ago, if you hire people who are smarter than you and better than you can get a lot of awards. And so that's been the story of my life. So I accept this on behalf of my former colleagues, who are the ones who did the hard work and made the hard decisions on all of these cases. And I only have a couple of minutes, but Citizens Union is an amazing organization that cares deeply about good government. And it's not the only one, but it's one of the great ones. And I tried as much as possible while I was the United States Attorney, and I'm trying still in private life, to give voice to those issues that people care about. And of all the kinds of cases that we did, and we did terrorism cases and gang cases and insider trading cases and fraud cases and Ponzi scheme cases, but the cases, for whatever reason, and I think I understand why, and the people in this room understand why more than anyone, the cases that had the most resonance and the cases that caused people to feel most satisfied in some way were the ones where we held accountable men and women who swore an oath of office to serve the public, and instead of serving the public, serve themselves. And there's something about public corruption that's different from other kinds of crime. Only public corruption affects everyone, whether you follow the case or not, whether you care about public issues or not, whether you vote or not. The people who we put into office affect everyone's fate. And A gang problem can be isolated to one community. Terrorism can affect one building or one area. Certain kinds of fraud can be targeted at one segment of the population. But public corruption literally affects everyone, whether you know it or not. And it's a foundational kind of issue. And that's one of the reasons I cared about it so much, and the people in my office cared about it so much. And obviously, and happily, you all at Citizens Union care about it so much. At the risk of looking like I'm plugging one of my current ventures, which is my podcast, which is available at applepodcast.com/Preet. There's 7 phenomenal episodes available. If you want my children to go to college, you'll subscribe. It's free. You'll hear me read ads in an embarrassing way. But there's been, the last point, there's been something that's been on my mind this week, because I interviewed someone yesterday, a gentleman by the name of Bill Browder, who used to be a very wealthy man in Russia. He's the grandson of the head of the Communist Party in the United States of America, rebelled against his family to become a capitalist, which is an odd kind of rebellion if you think about it. Went to Russia after the Iron Curtain fell and Glasnost was happening, and ran a huge investment fund, which doesn't resonate probably so much with folks. But over time, one of the things he did was to call out corruption on the part of Russian oligarchs, in particular, the friends and allies and associates of noted thug and Donald Trump friend, Vladimir Putin. And, about 7, 8, 9 years ago, he got on the wrong side of Vladimir Putin and his oligarchs because he was calling out corruption on the part of various companies. And he was expelled from the country, and his office was raided, which again doesn't engender much sympathy because he did very well. But he hired a lawyer to look into all this. And the name of that lawyer is Sergei Magnitsky. And not everyone in America knows who Sergei Magnitsky is, but I think his name should have resonance for everyone in this room, given what we all care about, and that is honest government and the absence of corruption. Sergei Magnitsky was a 35-year-old lawyer in Russia who began to look into what had happened to the Hermitage firm, which was Bill Browder's firm. And he found, among other things, that oligarchs and friends and allies of Putin had undertaken a campaign against the fund, and he began to document all of this. And as he began to document it and call out corruption in Russia from some years ago, allies and friends of Putin and Putin himself got very upset about it. And to make a long story short, at some point, they arrested this young lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky. They put him in prison on trumped-up charges that were false, if you follow the record. Sergei Magnitsky spent 358 days in prison. At some point, he fell ill. He didn't get any medical treatment. He lost 40 pounds because of his incarceration. Over the course of his time in prison, he was never able to visit his family. He was tortured. He was beaten. And by the way, all of this is happening because of what? Not because he was a mass killer, but because he dared to expose corruption that was going on in Russia. And during this time, if you listen to the podcast, you don't have to. But it's a compelling story. Somebody tweeted out today that's the first time they'd ever cried during listening to a podcast, because it's a very sad story. It's tough to listen to, but it's important, I think, for people to know the story. And over time, at some point, he developed severe pancreatitis. Sergei Magnitsky was never treated. No one came to his aid. He was transferred from prison to prison around Russia. I asked Bill Browder at some point, did you think at this point of how to help him? And he said, well, what the Russians were trying to do was to get this white-collar lawyer, young guy, of not any particular fame or distinction, to recant his accusations about the theft of $230 million. It's a long story, but essentially, there was a theft by a number of oligarchs of $230 million. And Bill Browder said, I hoped he would, and I encouraged him to, submit a false confession to the Russian court so he would be spared. And that's all that the Russians wanted. And he said, this young man who was in solitary confinement, being tortured, had no particular closeness to Bill Browder other than he was his lawyer, refused to bear false witness, refused to lie, refused to confess to something that he hadn't done. And at the end of the day, after 358 days in prison, he finally, the authorities in Russia finally realized that he had pancreatitis, and one of the facilities did not want to have this on their watch and on their hands, and they transferred him to another place. And instead of getting medical treatment there, men came in and beat him with rubber batons until he was dead. And so Sergei Magnitsky, in defiance of what corrupt oligarchs and a corrupt regime wanted, was found dead in a pool of his own urine, a testament to what happens when corruption is allowed to flourish and where rule of law is not allowed to flourish. And it's a sad story, but the upside of it is that Bill Browder, who had been a wealthy man, dedicated himself to making sure that Sergei Magnitsky, who was a fighter against corruption, against his will, did not die in vain. And he lobbied the American Congress, the Canadian Congress, and other countries to pass what has now become known as basically the Magnitsky Act, which shows Russia that if you violate the law and you engage in corruption and you cause a man's death because he was fighting against corruption, there's a price to pay for that. And the price to pay for that, it may not be enough, but it's your visas will not be honored, and your assets will be frozen, and the whole world will know that the community of nations cares about this and will not let it stand. And it's not the most important law in the world, but symbolically, given what we all care about in this room, it's incredibly important. And so the point of all that is to say, in our unified fight against corruption, we can be incredibly saddened by what happened to that man, Sergei Magnitsky, and we should be. But we can also be inspired by it. We can be inspired by the actions taken by so many people in the wake of his mistreatment and his death. We can be inspired by the light he shone on odious corruption, and we can be inspired by the people standing in line to push forward his legacy. And so sometimes we take inspiration from things that happen locally, and sometimes we can take inspiration from things that happen globally, and this is an example of that. And so I hope, as we think about what is going on in our city, in our state, in our country, we can be upset by a lot of things going on, but the story of Sergei Magnitsky should, I think, give us both perspective and also inspiration to do everything we can, given that we actually have it better in this country. We have more rule of law in this country, to fight against any encroachment on the part, I don't care if it's a president or a vice president or a chief of staff or anyone else, that we stand for what is right and what the rule of law means, because we have learned something from the things that are happening in our own community and also what happened in Russia with Sergei Magnitsky. So with that, congratulations to all the other honorees. God bless you.